Anant, welcome back to the show.
Hey Stephan, thanks for having me again.
So there's been a lot going on. I think the conversation around learning to self-custody is always an important one. It's always one that's very fresh on my mind as well. And so, we're seeing a lot of discussion. And I think recently, of course, there was the news about Luke Dasher losing his coins. I think, I don't know exactly how many, but probably something in the range of 200 Bitcoins. So, a serious amount of coin. And so there's been a lot of people making some noise about this statement, right? They've been saying, oh, look, even if a Bitcoin core developer couldn't secure his coins, then what hope does the average person have? Like, they've been saying this kind of narrative. Of course, I disagree with that strongly. But I wonder, how do you think about that?
See, self-custody, I wouldn't like to claim that self-custody is, mentally the easiest thing to do. It is a new way to secure your stuff. So it is going to be, there are going to be mental hurdles when people are trying to do it. There are going to be new things that people have to learn, and it does not come without self-responsibility, right? So no matter how us developers and builders want to make it easier, it doesn't come without learning, and it doesn't come without self-responsibility. Having said that, and having understood that this is a journey, even 5 years down the line, Stephen will be talking about self-custody. And why self-custody, what other things can make self-custody more secure, like there may be a new vault proposal or maybe new opcode people are proposing. So there will always be improvements in self-custody. Even the mnemonic and the seed words that we use, that was not always there. So what I'm trying to say is that the self-custody is a journey. There is no perfect self-custody solution, and also self-custody solution is very personal, right? So in case of specifically the incident you're talking about, that is very, very specific and a very, very niche case. It's not going to, it is more of a FUD. It doesn't really apply to, normal users. No one is going to probably have like a custom security solution like he had, right? So it's almost a non-issue for regular hodlers. But yes, there is an aspect of people start questioning, okay, is their self-custody solution proper? Is it, there is something more than they can do about it? And, the whole conversation starts again. And this is going to happen again and again. But as you and me know, and what I've understood from that situation, most of it was, honestly, it is more of a FUD, because I don't know if there was even a cold storage really involved, the way we term cold storage, air-gapped storage. So there are a lot of moving parts, and it is a developing story. We don't know all the details of it. So once we know all the details of it, probably there'll be some learnings out of it. But we already know that, you shouldn't roll your own self-custody. You shouldn't be doing stuff that is very custom to yourself, and it is not really something which people have used and tried, and it's not tried and tested. So these are the few things which we can already draw out of that incident.
Right, yeah. To the whole question around should people self-custody, what we end up having is a lot of conversation around what is the best way, right? We see people saying, oh, just, multi-signature is too complex. People say things like you should only do single signature maybe with a passphrase. That seems to be, if I had to assess, let's say, the meta on Bitcoin Twitter or in online discussion, that seems to be the meta. They say, oh, multi-sig, it's in the too hard basket for most people. Obviously, I disagree again. I think it's more like, if you're a beginner, you should use maybe a guided solution, like have a professional help you. And intermediates and advanced level people, you can learn. It's not that hard. Like, yes, it's not that hard. That's how I'm seeing it. I'm curious how you see it, like single signature or multi-signature.
See, we, first of all, as you know, our history is, we have been making the, Bitcoin products for a while, and we come from a single sig world. Hexa wallet is a single sig solution. It has all the aspects of a typical single sig solution of what a wallet does. And we can, come to the deconstruction of the wallet, which will probably really help some of the listeners. But essentially, we come from that space. So definitely a very neat solution for people who are just getting started, or people who have, small amount of money. Obviously, that is subjective, but essentially, not like life savings or stuff like that. But when it comes to something which you want to hold for long term, right? You don't want to hold it for 6 months and just trade it off. And you want to, and it is a significant amount of wealth. Multi-sig solution is definitely something you should consider, right? Consider it, understand it, and then probably you can still take a call that, for me, a single sig solution with a hardware wallet and passphrase is enough. That's a fair thing. If you have a safe, or if you have a place where you can keep your hardware wallet and you're 100% sure is that no one is going to ever touch it, and your heirs are going to automatically figure it out, then probably that might be the solution for you. So my message for a lot of people who I talk to, so I talk to a lot of single sig people, and while building Keeper over the last 1 year, I've been talking to a lot of people who are interested in multi-sig. So I do know both sides of the argument. So my message for everyone who have significant wealth and want to hold it for long term is actually consider it properly and then take a call. And what I have seen is a lot of people who consider multi-sig properly, right, and look at a guided solution like a wizard and the way we have built Keeper, they actually come to appreciate multi-sig.
Yeah, and so I think what we see is a lot of discussion about the complexity, the added complexity, the backups aspect, the dealing with, let's say, if you're trying to do it, the right way or the proper way with different hardware devices and so on. I can understand there's a little bit of extra complexity, but I think my thinking on this is guided more by my friend Michael Flaxman. I think he's coming from that. He's more of in the multi-sig maxi camp, and I think his view is like it gives you fault tolerance, right? It gives you this extra level of security. You just need to know how to do the backup correctly, and you have to do certain things in the right way, in the basic way that you get these basics right. And then once you get those right, you are just so much more secure. So Absolutely. That's how I'm seeing it. So if you were advising somebody, and let's say this person is now an intermediate or an advanced level, they're not a beginner anymore. They're quite comfortable with their single signature setup. Why should they consider multi-sig in your view?
See, I think you mentioned it correctly, is that the security guarantees of resiliency or tolerance that multi-sig offers you don't really get that by single sig. Okay, you can add passphrase to it. It adds a little bit of resilience in terms of attack vectors, but it also adds another single point of failure. So it's not really, people try to recreate the multi-sig using, a combination of passphrase and single sig and, kind of keeping multiple copies of it. But essentially the real optionality or the resiliency that multi-sig gives you, that those security guarantees you cannot get with single sig, right? And some of the things people see when you do single sig, if you really break down single sig, if you deconstruct what simply happens in a single sig, then you would realize that actually single sig, the attack vectors or the places where you can get attacked for your funds in a single sig actually is the same as multi-sig, while in multi-sig you have multiple entities. So you can minimize the trust, right? Let me try and explain that a little more. So let's take a single sig and deconstruct it. So there are essentially just four key aspects to the whole system. So the first step really is the user would generate an entropy, right? That's the first step. The second step is second part of it, or the step of it is how is that backed up? So there's an entropy, it is backed up. Then the third step is from that entropy, public and private keys are created, right? Public keys are used for receiving funds and balance checking and all that, which we typically call wallet functions. And the fourth category is the signing part of it, which is done by private keys. Now, if you look at these four functions can actually be performed by completely separate entities. Okay. Let's take an example. So entropy generation. You can use a simple dice roll or seed picker or something else to generate the entropy. It doesn't involve any wallet on any hardware device. You can use them as well, but this is an example. Then you could go away and store that entropy in terms of seed words on a metal seed plate. Right? You could use a mobile device as a watch only wallet with the XPub, and you could receive funds on that. While you could put, use a seed signer, which is a stateless device. You could put the seed in it every time you're signing in, or using the seed QR, and do the signing from that device. So what you see here is that there are 4 parts to it, which are completely can be handled in different ways, right? What happens in typical wallets is some of these functions or a lot of these functions are combined together. In the simplest case, I would have one app which does the entropy generation, which does the backup, which does the receiving part, and which also signs the transaction. That's the simplest mobile app. The most common what we see, Stephan, is that other than the backup, all the 3 functions are combined in a typical mobile app. So, for example, Hexa wallet. Hexa wallet would generate the entropy. You would store a copy of it separately. And then the receiving of funds and the balance check and all that wallet functions, and the signing happens from within the same wallet, right? So if you see these these 4 functions are combined in different ways to give rise to different solutions, right? In all of these situations, the wallet which is used for signing or which is used for receiving funds, they are the places where there can be some attacks, or there can be some vulnerabilities. For example, if during the receiving part, the wallet might simply change the receive address. If you don't check it, then the funds, if I'm receiving funds from you, I show an address that I think is mine, but it is someone else's, it's completely gone, right? So if Hexa wallet shows you wrong address and you send money to that money is completely gone. Now let's bring this multisig in. The same 4 things happen in multisig, but with 4 of these, with the multiple of these keys combined. Now, if these functions if there are different, like the example you took of multiple vendors, now if multiple vendors are involved, you could actually, by following some simple thumb rule, you can actually check that receiving address, let's say in 2 of the entities, and you're so much safer. There's not a single wallet which can attack and change your receive address. If you check the receive address on the wallet and maybe one of the hardware device, it will be really difficult for someone to actually collude across those two systems and steal your funds. So I'm going into the real details of it, but if you really abstract it way back up again, the trust is you really can minimize the trust across multiple vendors and multiple locations and multiple platforms if you use a multisig instead of a single sig.
Right, and I think that's a really important point to understand. And when we have multisig, it just gives us this whole new level of being able to check things. And so, for example, we can design things in such a way, and I know, Stephan is not as Stephan Livera. He is not as actively contributing in the space nowadays. But I think he was popularizing this idea of how can I make a wallet or something where even if the coordinator was lying, it could, or how can I set something up where if even one of the devices is lying, I'm still safe. And so in a multi-sig context, it gives you that fault tolerance, right? Because now the coordinating software, whether that's Spectre, Desktop, or Sparrow, or it's Unchained Capital, or it's Nunchuck, or it's Keeper, whatever that even if the coordinator app is lying to you, if you're checking that transaction on the device, or in the case of receiving, you are checking your receive address on the actual device, then you are a whole another level safer, because it's much harder for somebody to compromise you and steal your coins. And then this becomes very valuable once we're talking about your life savings, or even for a corporate context or a fund or a trust or any of these business entities or other legal entities that have a very high security requirement. So I think it's such an important thing. But some of the main hurdles, let's say, that for most people, what would you say are some of the main hurdles that people have to using multi-sig? Like, so I'm sure you've had many conversations with people who are probably doing single sig or just single sig with a passphrase. What kind of excuse do they give you, or reason do they tell you, this is why I don't want to do multi-sig?
Yeah, so Stephan, there is definitely a learning curve, right? There is a learning curve when you come to Bitcoin. Self-custody itself is a learning curve, and within self-custody, multisig is definitely a steeper learning curve than just, because there is a lot of education available around how to back up seed phrases and how to use a simple single sig wallet. And in a case of single sig wallet, if you just listen to like a 5-minute thing, you would understand. But in case of multisig, yes, it is operationally more difficult, right? You have to ensure more things. It does, but that does give you an order of magnitude better security, like we explained. It's simply impossible for one coordinating app to collude with another hardware manufacturer and maybe one more other hardware manufacturer, somewhere across the globe, to steal just your coins. So it's almost, it is very difficult. It's order of magnitude difficult. So coming back to the problem, to the hurdles, is that this operational difficulty is one, right? And that is why it is very important that there is kind of a guided process. It's not like you are trying to do it with a command line, but there's some kind of a wizard, some kind of guided process which takes you through different steps, tells you at every step, okay, what does this mean? Maybe do this, go into the hardware wallet at this particular place, and then try to extract the XPub or something like that. So if there's a guided process, yes, it will be slightly longer, but it will be handheld in such a way that multisig, the operational part of it, becomes not that much difficult. So that's one of the excuses I've heard. Not excuses, that's a
reason, let's say, to be fair to them, right? Not an excuse, let's say reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. See, I was talking to one of the guys who was in advertising. He's a very creative guy. He loves Bitcoin, he loves the idea of it, but he just doesn't have the time to understand multisig beyond to get him on self-custody was a few years. To get him on multisig would maybe probably another few years, which is to be fair to him, he is busy, he's doing his creative stuff, he's not really, it doesn't have the time or inclination to learn about multisig. So that is a genuine reason, but that's why products that we are we are building, or a lot of people are building nowadays, the coordinating softwares, are actually it's a kind of an assisted multisig. So that's one. The second is the cost. The cost is definitely a factor. So if you do a 305 multisig, it might be somewhere around $500 for you. That's probably a good 305 multisig. You can probably reduce the cost by trying out some combinations or using some software based keys instead of hardware based keys. And if you use some of these keys, it is quite okay in terms of security. So there is a cost to it. The costs can come down by decent combinations. Plus, there are a lot of people, a lot of companies who are trying to build products which are lower cost, like TapSigner, like Jade, like there are a few other wallets, right? So the costs are going to come down. So these two, Stephen, are the main hurdles I've heard, and the coordinating software are trying to do assisted multisig, while hardware wallet manufacturers are trying to reduce the cost. So hopefully this is going to become easier and easier.
Yeah, and it may be a question of another cycle or two for the multisig user experience to get better and popularize this further. I'm bullish on this though. I do believe it'll come maybe in a cycle or two, because once you have a lot of people who have a lot of value in fiat terms, purchasing power terms, it'll just be so much more applicable for them. But I certainly appreciate that today there are some operational difficulties. You have to think about, okay, is it more difficult to use these different wallets, right, as opposed to just having one cold card or one device or whatever you're using? Now you might have to think, okay, I need to know how to use a cold card and a seed signer and a tap signer and a Kobo or a Keystone rather, whatever, pick your mix. And not just that, whoever is recovering your coins, right? Because now we've also got to think about, okay, you or me, Anant, you and I could probably figure it out, like even, but can our wives and kids figure this out? That's like the other level too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is where standardization really helps. If you talk about learning how to use different hardware wallets or signing devices, then if it is a standard way that those devices work, it is much more easier, right? If you learn one of them, probably you can use another one. Same as using a phone. If you use one type of phone, there's a good chance that with a little bit of learning you can use another phone, because they have been adopted a lot, and there are some basic assumptions or basic capabilities that have been developed. So if there is more standardization around how these things are used, then definitely it's going to get easier and easier, right? So we have PSBT standard, we have the BIPs, we have the more very importantly product descriptors, output descriptors, and BSMS, and all these good standards which are developing, which is going to make this learning easier, because if you learn it for one device, you will probably know it for another device. So that all these things are coming together.
Yeah, sure. And so let's talk through a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about the multi-sig setup process, right? Just so people understand what's going on there, right? So we've got, let's just keep it simple, right? Let's just say it's a 2 of 3 with, 3 different device types, and we're coordinating that. What are some of the different steps involved to set up this multi-sig and operate that multi-sig?
Awesome. So let's go back to the deconstruction we did earlier, right? And it is going to be exactly the same. First, there is a step of generating the entropy. In this case, as there are 3 devices, you will generate it in 3 different places. Now, this itself is going to give you, no single point of failure. But let's say you have a ledger, a cold card, and let's say a jade or a seed signer. When you initialize those devices, you can use an existing seed phrase you might have, or you can generate a new one from those devices. You can even add passphrase there. So now what you've done is you have 3 devices who have generated different entropy. Okay, so that piece is done. The entropy generation was the first piece. Now how do you back it up? You can back it up as a device itself. For example, you just want to take care of the device and put it in a safe. And additionally, furthermore, you can actually put down the seed words in a written format on steel and keep it somewhere else, so that the backup step is taken care of. Now you have 3 devices ready and their backup secured. The 2 steps are done. Now what you would do is you would take those devices to an app like Keeper. You would create the multisig. Right? What creation of multisig that really step means is multisig is not really created at that point, but your wallet has the capability of generating the addresses which can be signed with a script which is a 2 of 3 from these 3 wallets. Right? So what you would do is you would communicate with these 3 hardware wallets either through NFC or QR code, and pass on the XPub, relevant XPub, to the coordinating software. Now the coordinating software only has the XPubs, which are the public key generators. Which is the public key generator. It still doesn't have any control of the private key, right? So now,
so just to be clear, this is like there's a special menu in some cases, right? Because it's not necessarily the same. It's not the same as the one that you would use for that device in single signature mode. So for example, in Cold Card, you go into settings and you have multi-signature export. I think it's in advanced or settings, and in there you go to multi-sig export, take that out into a SD card, put that in, and then the coordinator app has to sort of take all of those 3, right?
So exactly. So I think that's an important step, because single sig and multi-sig are different standards. So it is good to use the right right XPub in the right path. So you would go into the settings and you would follow the steps to import these 3 XPubs from these 3 devices, right? And when you do that, you can do that through an SD card. In Keeper, you can use NFC for cold card and stuff like that. So that's slightly more secure and operationally easier. You don't really need another computer to get in the middle. So that's what you would do. Now your coordinating software has all the necessary pieces to make sure that you can produce addresses which can be signed by that script. So that is the creation part. Now the sending part is let's start with receiving.
Sorry, at this point we also do need to, once you've created that multi-sig, then we need to register the quorums into those devices, right? So that's the other step where now the coordinating software, whether it's Spectre or Sparrow or Keeper, will give you a little piece of information, which again, you either use with a SD card or you do the QR scan back and forth. And then those devices can now register and understand, these are the other devices in my multi-sig. So let's say, I've got this cold card and I know that, okay, there's a seed signer in my quorum and a keystone or whatever other device. And then you have to, well, theoretically, like if you want to be really secure, you want to check, and you can read on the device, these are the other XPubs associated for this device. So you can kind of check everything, make sure it's all, matching up.
Yeah, so I was trying to explain the receive journey so that it is easier to understand why registration is needed. Right? So absolutely important, the registration step, but why it is needed is because how does receive happen is the coordinating software takes these XPubs completely independently of hardware wallets, and it will show you a particular receive address. And you would, one way of doing it, you just send money to that receive address, and you will have funds if the coordinating software is not trying to be trying to steal your funds, right? When you are signing it, when you're sending transaction in a happy case scenario, you would the coordinating software will build the transaction up, right? Using the details that it has. It will construct something called PSBT, which is partially signed Bitcoin transaction. It's just a format of how a transaction is represented with additional data. And then it communicates again by NFC or Bluetooth or QR code with these hardware devices, right? Or signing devices. And they would sign these transactions. Now, there are a few things which can go wrong here, and that's why you correctly mentioned the registration step. Now, because the coordinating software has the central role of combining the XPub, it has the central role of generating the PSBT, which a signing device would sign. What if the coordinating software is trying to cheat? What if the coordinating software is trying to manipulate these things? Though it doesn't have the private keys, but it can manipulate the signing devices to sign the wrong PSBT or give them the wrong address. So that is where the registration step is super important. And I think you described it well. Registration basically means the coordinating software is saying, by the way, this is the wallet policy, or the multi-sig configuration I'm trying to do. Do you want to store those details? And at this step, the user would look at the details that is getting stored. They would probably call it cold storage, or they would probably call it safe or vault or whatever they want to call it. And then they would store that in their signing devices. Now, what has happened? You have created multiple copies of the same configuration, right? So next time when signing or receiving happens, coordinating app cannot cheat you independently. You can always have you still have 3 other entities that you can check and say, okay, there is something wrong here. So registration is a super important step which lets the signing devices independently verify that, okay, if coordinating app or any of the other signing devices is trying to cheat or not. So that's the essential fundamental benefit of.
Right, and then so as we're going through and we're checking, so just making sure I'm summarizing everything. So we had our 3 devices. We've initialized all 3 of them. We either brought or did our own entropy, or we used the device entropy to create a 24-word seed or a 12-word seed. Then we ingest the multi-sig XPub out of those 3 into the coordinator. Now the coordinator has the built together policy, let's say 2 of 3. Now we register the quorum into each of those devices. So now each of those devices knows the other device. And then you, the human, should obviously be checking that and making sure, XPub, it matches to the other XPubs. There's no lying here. There's no, everything matches up. Everything's good. I've got my 2 or 3. Yes, take that. And now, what's next? Well, now we can receive, let's say, a small amount of coin into this wallet, and you can check that on multiple devices, right? Because some of these devices have an address explorer, which is really useful. It's a great feature because now you can see it on device 1, you can see it on device 2 and device 3, or maybe what you do is you would check a quorum of the devices, right? Maybe if you're running a 2 or 3, you might check it on 2 of the devices. And then see, okay, on the coordinator, it's also showing me the same address. Okay, good. Now I can receive some coin into this address, right?
Absolutely. So testing, even if you buy a new car, testing it out first for a trial run is always, there's nothing, it cannot go wrong. So testing it the way you said is a great idea, and we recommend it. Testing it for sending and receiving and doing small bits here and there is definitely something users should do before they transfer more of their funds. There are a few checks that these signing devices do automatically. For example, the change address. When you're receiving funds, there is just a single address. But when you're sending funds, there is an address that you send to, but any of that change, because UTXO is like a single piece, that when the UTXO breaks, a piece of it comes back to your change address. Now, there is a potential where the coordinating software just, manipulates and puts their own change address. So this change address is something that any of the devices which have been registered properly can check automatically. The user doesn't have to manually check it. That's a very neat feature and a very simple thing, because if the change address is incorrect, the signing device would simply not sign it. So that's a kind of a check under the hood that happens because there are multiple devices and you register with them. So that's pretty neat. That may not happen in a single SIG where you are just using a mobile app and you have you have a seed phrase written down somewhere. So this is some of the additional benefits.
Yeah. And the reason we mention this as well is because there have been some attacks like this disclosed, historically. Now, I'm not sure if the change one was necessarily used or exploited in the wild, but it was there for some time, and then obviously manufacturers found it, it got patched up and so on. And so now there's a much better awareness and understanding in the industry, and I think the products, the software and the hardware are being built with this in mind, right? So that's useful. And then, so what's next in the journey, let's say?
So I think if you're really paranoid and if you really want to get to that level, there's one more step you could do. So what you've done, you have set it up, you have registered it, checked the details, that's like the theoretical checking of it. Then you've done a practical piece where you actually send around funds and you have checked whether those funds are showing up properly or not. There's one more step you could do. Is basically there are now multiple coordinating softwares available, right? Initially there was only Electrum.
Electrum.
That's it, nothing else. So you couldn't really know, and others were closed source, so you couldn't do much. But with the help of in the last year, there are many more. There's Sparrow, there's Spectre, there's Nuncher, there's Keeper. What you could do is recreate the wall. Let's say you've created a 2 of 3 in Keeper. You could take the output descriptors, which we can talk about in a little bit, but basically the wallet multisig configuration, put it in Sparrow, right? And check whether it is showing the same addresses. And when you're doing the testing, at that time also you can check the balance from Sparrow and from Keeper. You can try to send from Sparrow and check it in Keeper. So now what you also have a redundancy, or not redundancy, that is the right word, but multiple places you can check the coordinating software.
Yeah, I guess it's just an extra layer of verification, right? And certainly these are things that you do when you set up your multisig, right? And so I think this is a great way for people to give themselves that peace of mind as well, because this is one of those things that's really kind of crazy, but it's this idea that the keys can be portable in a way, that you can take the key, like theoretically I could have set up that same key in like a Trezor, but then import it into a cold card, and it's going to sign the same way. It's going to sign the same coins in a way. So that's kind of useful, and that's a step that people are doing to help verify. Okay, my access to my coins is or another one that people might do is do a test recovery, right? Like, let me send $30 into this multisig, and then just practice. Oh, I've lost one of the devices, or I've lost this other thing. Can I recover? Do I have the right pieces together to be able to recover if something goes wrong? And then this can give you that extra peace of mind. Oh, okay, I was able to recover. Okay, I'm safe, right?
Exactly. And the best part, Stephan, is that every single user doesn't have to do this. If a lot of users have done it initially, or some users do it regularly, then if any of these pieces, if any one of the coordinating software or any one of the hardware devices trying to do something funny, they'll be caught. So the incentive to actually try and steal funds when there are a lot of entities involved is actually reduced. So this is the very, very key part. See, one of the things in Bitcoin we know is the security is also because of the numbers, right? Because there are so many private keys possible, it's not easy to guess them. It is not the same scale, but the idea is if you have multiple entities, then you can minimize trust in any one of them. You don't need to trust a coordinating software. I can use another one. I don't need to use a signing device, I can use another one, right? So as these things develop, and we have like 12 or 13 signing devices available now, 5 or 6 coordinator apps available now. So this becomes easier and easier, and people get more and more confident about it. There's a lot more talking about it, a lot more education that goes about it. People who are listening to this podcast might, come back with questions. They might feel slightly more comfortable. So things are converging with standards, with the ecosystem, and with education. And I'm like yourself, I'm also very bullish on multisig.
Yeah. And so then let's talk about spending now. So there's, let's say I've set up my 2 of 3, and now I want to send some coins to you, Anant. So I say, Anant, give me an address. I'm going to pay you, 0.01 Bitcoin or whatever. What's the steps what steps do I go through?
Perfect. So if I give you an address and you have a 2 of 3 multisig setup, the first thing to do is to check that address. I probably have, I'm showing it to you on a screen, or I have, messaged you that particular address. So when you put that address in your coordinating software, and the coordinating software would probably produce a PSBT transaction, you would take it to your first hardware device, right? On that hardware device, the first thing is to make sure that you check whether that send to address is correct or not, right? That's the first step. Like I said, the change address is automatically checked if that particular device is registered. Okay? So these are the 2 checks that happen during sending, if all the devices are registered. So all you have to do, because they're successfully registered, if you have chosen the right wallet from the signing device, then these are the checks that happen.
Yeah. And I think maybe it's also, so obviously in this case it's a 2 of 3, so I'd have to go and, let's say I have one device at home and then another device in a vault or some other location somewhere. I have to go to that other location and get the signature from that device, or from that signing device, to get the second signature, bring that back to the coordinating application. So in this case, if it's Keeper or Spectre or Sparrow, whatever. And then once I've ingested that second PSBT signature, then it'll say, this transaction is now valid and you can broadcast it. Right? Yeah.
I think you have explained the user steps really well. So those are the checks that happen at one place, but then you take it to another location. The same kind of check you can do there. You can check the receiving address at your office or any other location you have. Then you port it back to the coordinating software. Now the coordinating software, because a specific transaction has been signed and there's no way for the coordinating app, because it doesn't have the private keys, to change it, you can let the coordinating app broadcast the transaction.
Right. And I think one other point just on practicality that might be useful for some people, I think I've been playing around with devices for years, right? So I think for me, in practice, I have found there are times where QRs can be difficult, right? So because the QR flow, like as an example, it depends on the device you're using. Sometimes the resolution is bad, or the camera on the other device is bad. And so one tip that I've found useful is if you can have the QR scanning device, that could be maybe your home device. And then if you've got like one that's in a vault, as an example, and you might have a mix, right? You might have a mix in your quorum. And so then the devices in the vault, maybe they can be a little bit easier to have a micro SD for signing, because they are a little, I think, it depends on the flow, right? It depends on the coordinating app and everything. But if you just have a micro SD card and you're just going into the vault area or into an office or somewhere, then maybe it's a little easier to kind of get the signature done. Because if you're kind of out in a remote location and you're trying to scan the QR and the signature is not working, and things like this, where it can be a bit difficult, right? So I think in that case, it might be a little easier. Now, of course, there is NFC as well. So there's NFC devices, things like, the tap signer is an example. But I guess there is one downside with devices like the tap signer is you're getting less, because you can't check the addresses on this thing. There's less that you can check about the transaction. So, there's trade-offs with all of these things. It is a cheaper device, but I guess if you're storing serious money, well then maybe you're going for the device, the bigger devices with a screen and with a keypad and things like this. So those are a few tips, I guess, that I would just offer for listeners as well when you're thinking about if you're crafting your own multi-sig. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the backups and the output descriptor and BSMS. Can you decipher a little bit of this, at least current state of play as we talk? Today's the 31st of January, 2023. What's the current state of play with multi-sig and backups?
See, one thing, Stephen, I want to mention because you touched on a very important point. When you are keeping something in the safe and you want to use SD card versus QR code, one of the things people forget is some of these devices used to not have a battery, right? So what you don't want to do is actually get that device back into your home and then do the stuff and then take it back, right? So if you have it in a safe, it is not a bad idea either. That most of the new devices, that's why they have some kind of battery. The new Ledgers, the Jade, they have battery. Or if you have like a cold card that requires a battery, it's not a bad idea. Just carry the battery with you. So carry the battery and SD card with you. Just do the piece there, either through QR code or SD card, and then come back. Do not carry the signing. You don't have to carry the signing device back. You can keep it back safe where it is.
Right, yeah. So just to explain there. So the idea here is, let's say we've got a 2 or 3 multi-sig and you're storing like a big amount of coin on this or whatever. The whole point is to not have to have yes, at the start when you set up that quorum, yes, all 3 devices can be in the same location because you haven't put any coins on there. But once you put coins on, then you don't want to bring them back together because theoretically you're vulnerable at that point, right? Like if a criminal or someone comes to, try to attack you at that point, you're vulnerable.
Yes, even at creation, actually, because the way PSBT and multisig works is not really interactive that way, you can actually not have them at the same location at any point of time. Right?
Yeah,
so
of course. Yeah.
You can do one import in office, one import at home, one import at the bank.
Gotcha. Yeah. I was just saying more from a practicality because you might want to, let's say you want to set it up and then test with small amounts before you separate the devices and put them into different locations. One in the mountain, one in the one in the vault, one in the office, one in the somewhere. So I think that's probably where I was saying that just from a practicality point of view. But then once you put the coins on there, like serious coin on there, then you don't want to pull them together because now, that's where the risk is. So anyway, we've spoken about that. Let's get back to the backups question. So, typically this means you save a PDF or an output descriptor or BSMS. Can you tell us what's the current state of play there?
Yeah. So why do we need these output descriptors or word configuration? Is because even if you have 2 of the 3 keys, you cannot recover your funds, right? I just want to repeat that. In a multisig, if you, let's say in a 305 multisig, it doesn't mean that if you have 3 of the 5 keys, you can completely, you cannot even recover any of your funds. The reason being is that, okay, you have the 3 keys to the safe. Let's imagine an analogous safe, right? So you have 3 keys of the safe and you can open the safe, but how do you find that safe, right? How do you get to that safe? That is the map, in that terms, is what the vault configuration is. And that vault configuration or the multisig configuration file contains the map details, or it basically contains the other public details of the other keys that you would need to unlock your funds basically, or get access to your funds. Just to want to be clear why multisig configuration files are so important. Now that is where things like output descriptors and BSMS and all these things come through. So output descriptor is a very neat standard. It takes care of all the different aspects of what a configuration means. Configuration doesn't just mean the xpub; it also means the path and the script type that you're using and stuff like that, right? So that is what forms a output descriptor in a simple sense. I'm not getting into time log and multisig yet, but that's an output descriptor. And if you have the output descriptor and if you have the minimum number of keys, you can definitely access the funds. If you have 3 keys out of 5 and you have the multisig configuration file or output descriptor, you do not need the other 2 keys. That's the importance of it. Output descriptor is a format which a lot of wallets use. Now, like I said, there are multiple pieces in there, like the xpub, the path, the master fingerprint, the script type. So these are the part of output descriptor. I would say an improvement to that is the BSMS, which is Bitcoin secure multisig setup, I think. But BSMS essentially has the output descriptors. It given a specific output descriptor template, but it also has some other details. One very neat detail that BSMS has is actually it has the first address of the multisig, right? I really like this part and why that is important. So let's imagine you have these 5 devices. One of the option after registration, Stephan, is you go away and check all these 5 devices for all the expubs, all the paths and all the derivations and this and that, right? That's one way of doing it. But alternatively, what you could do is you could, if it's a normal multisig, you can just check the first address, right? Because the first address is a derivation of all these components. So if the first address is correct, or it's matching across the 5 devices, then there is no way they could have changed one of the expubs or they could have changed one of the paths, because they will not get the first receiving address. So by checking one piece, you have actually checked multiple of these items, right?
As you were mentioning, the BSMS has the first address, and so you were saying that basically because the first address it has to be the same, then I guess you're saying that's the reason why you find it useful as a wallet developer when you're coding or making and building this, right?
Even from a user point of view, instead of checking for like 5 different things, because they have to check all the cosigner expubs, so they will have to check 5 expubs, plus they will have to check the 5 derivation paths, plus they will have to check the 5 script types, because any of this going wrong will mean that it's a completely different vault. So if instead of that, what you could do in a simple case, there are complex cases where that doesn't apply, but in a simple case, what that means is if you check the first address, you essentially have checked all the input parameters to that first address. So if I check this one address across the 5 device, I know it is the right registration. So these are the kind of improvements that are happening from a standards point of view, and that is why I said standards are leading towards a better UX in the multisig space.
I see. Yeah. Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about Keeper then specifically. Let's talk a little bit about some of the... Oh, sorry, one other thing. So with this whole output descriptor, BSMS, I guess the important point just for people to remember is that you can keep multiple backups of this. Now, yes, it impacts your privacy, but it helps your redundancy and your ability to recover if something goes wrong. So this piece, this output descriptor, the BSMS, the wallet configuration file, whatever it's called, make sure you have multiple backups of that. You might even think about having a copy of that with your lawyer or someone who you're doing inheritance planning with, because it'll be essential as part of the recovery process there. So that's just something to keep in mind.
One other thing you could do with those files is, which is very practical, is if you have the signing devices, let's say in a safe, you can keep a copy there. If you have like 3 devices in 3 safes in 3 different locations, just keep one copy with each of them. So even if you
get a USB, put one each.
Yeah, or you can just like have it in a in a PDF or something. So that's a very practical way of doing it. What some of the hardware wallets also are doing, Stephan, is when you are registering, this is very neat. When you're registering, you're actually giving those details to the hardware wallet.
Yeah.
For example, Coldcard lets you export that back. So now I don't need to store another copy of the vault configuration with a Coldcard if it's in a safe. I can use the same vault configuration from Coldcard to get that back. So things are becoming much easier. You don't have to keep that separately, basically.
Right. Yeah. So it's even more redundancy then.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the inheritance stuff, because I know this is something you are looking at for Keeper as well. So what's the plan there?
So inheritance, inheritance can be looked in different ways, right? A lot of extreme Bitcoiners might say, okay, I don't care about the legal aspects of it, and I just want to make sure my coins are safe and I can pass it on. Some even believe that they just want to die with their coins and just donate it to the network. I'm not of that opinion. I want to plan it for generations, and a lot of people want to do it that way. Once you have a future generation that you can look at, you would want to pass that wealth on for genuine reasons. So when you're doing inheritance planning, there are 2 aspects to it. One is obviously the access to the keys, and then the second is the right to have the keys, right? when it is about the right, it is the legal construct of your jurisdiction that you have the right to hold the keys. A lot of time, this aspect of the legal title or the rights to have the keys is missed out, right? What we want to do with Keeper is we want to look at both these aspects and assist in both these things. Okay, if let's say your partner is going to get the coins up if something happens to you, and you have told them all the locations where three of your devices are, then probably it's the access part of it is easy. But there is no reason that someone else, after you are not there, can claim that okay, that person has access to it, but actually that person is not the rightful owner. Then they would be in a mix, and you don't want to get them, let them get into that kind of situation. So that is why having your legal title clear, it's very easy. It's not very complicated. Is a very important way to secure things and make it easy for your loved ones, that they don't have to get into a hassle of first figuring out where the keys are and then also trying to prove that why those keys belong to them.
Why you're the rightful owner or heir of those coins.
Exactly. So these are the two aspects. What Keeper does is obviously it tells you what are the safeguarding tips, like we talked about, using a battery, using the SD card, of how to secure your keys, and not just for yourself. You might remember the PIN, but what about if someone else, your kids are trying to access it? Would they know the PIN? So it gives you a lot of safeguarding tips of how to secure your keys, not just for yourself, even for future generations. And that's the access part of it. It also helps you identify those that particular wallet or the multi-sig wallet in a very unique way, so that you can put a simple part of your will that okay, I have funds in this particular multisig, and this is how you identify this multisig, and anyone this person XYZ is actually the rightful owner of them. How do they get access doesn't have to be put in the will at all, so that if you don't want to trust your lawyer or the guy who is writing the will, you don't have to put the access part there at all. But you do have to put how you can uniquely identify those things and how that particular fund belongs to the heir.
Yeah, and I mean, there's all these privacy concerns aspects of it too, because there are people who might say, I don't want to disclose, how many coins I have or whatever. So some of that is going to be a little bit, you have to find a way.
So we have actually, we think we have found a way, and we've been talking to a lot of lawyers and a lot of people in this space, how this makes sense, and we've got great feedback on that. So what you put in the will doesn't have to be the experts. You don't really need to put the experts. You can put your master fingerprint there. You can put some other details there, which doesn't leak privacy at all, right? So there are some other ways of establishing the uniqueness. Basically, what you want to do at the end of it is, in the will, if there is an heir who is uniquely identified, that this is the heir, this is their legal name, this is where they live, or those kind of details, and you have uniquely identified, or as best as possible, uniquely identified which funds, then essentially you can, that's all that will needs. So using other methods, rather than putting experts, is a way to get across that privacy issue.
Gotcha. Yeah, and certainly, as I mentioned before, like some people might be comfortable with maybe giving an output descriptor to a lawyer, but other people very much not.
Yeah.
But of course, listeners should be aware there is a privacy consequence to that. So obviously, think that through. Some people, they're not comfortable with that, and they would rather keep that away from the lawyer or away from those other locations, and maybe that output descriptor is only backed up in a location that your family can see it, something like that. But you just have to also consider the trade-off of redundancy, right? The more copies of that out there, the more redundancy, and the easier it is for somebody to help recover in the case of that output descriptor information somehow being lost, right? Because it's possible, and we'd hate for people to lose access to the coins, right? So those are probably a few important points. Also, I guess there's some of the more advanced stuff that's coming, right? So I did an episode recently about Miniscript.
Yeah.
There's been some discussion about Musig2. Do you see applications for any of this stuff, or is it maybe a bit early?
It is definitely a bit early, but we are keeping close look at it, and we are very excited with Miniscript and Musig2, Frost and stuff. It is definitely early because, as you would appreciate, there are situations, not situations. There are still cases in terms of when you're using a Musig2 or you have interactivity involved there, which is not really the best thing when it comes to security. You don't want to really either bring the keys together or go to them multiple times, right? Neither do you want to make them interact with each other. So there are some unsolved problems in that space, but a lot of amazing people are working towards it. So that will probably get solved sooner or later. Miniscript has been, Miniscript has been around for a while now, right? And people often ask us, okay, why not Miniscript yet? Why not Miniscript yet? We have looked at Miniscript, we have played at Miniscript, but the practical aspect of it is, Stephan, is that Miniscript essentially generates a safe Bitcoin script, right? Miniscript is going to generate a safe Bitcoin script. However, other than multisig, the safe Bitcoin scripts it generates with multiple spending conditions and multiple branches and all that it doesn't really have that much of an importance when it's a simple multisig that can be done without with a simple script. But when it comes to multiple spending policies, that is when really like a 2 of 3 plus 2 of 1 of 2 plus a time lock, or some kind of a combination. That is when Miniscript really comes to the fore. Now, though you can produce that right now, but really there are 3 problems to it, because Taproot is still not Taproot or Musig is still not out there. So you wouldn't really be able to benefit that much from Miniscript right now as you would once these things are in place. So Miniscript can be used, but it is not effective without these other factors, right? So once these factors are there, and then there's less interactivity, and the hardware wallets are able to showcase those policies on the small screen, these are unsolved problems yet. That is when Miniscript will really be useful. So we are looking forward to those kind of developments in the ecosystem to be able to use these advanced features.
Yeah. Any thoughts on time locks as well? Because this is something where, people love to, I guess it's one of those areas where people love to philosophize and talk about, this and that. And now Bitcoin does have time locking, like on-chain time locking. But I think practical uses of that outside of, let's say, the smart contracting stuff like Lightning, which is a different, kettle of fish here. But in terms of multi-sig and stuff like that, are you seeing much interest in this or much practical use?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of people interested in time lock. There have been people, okay, are you going to do time lock? Are you going to do time lock? Yes, absolutely. Time lock is something which we have done internally. But the time lock and, we spoke about the registration and how you verify the details and all that. That particular piece is still not there for time locks. So you can implement time locks, but you may not have a particular signing device supporting it. Now, Ledger is working towards it, and we are working with Ledger to see how we can implement it. But essentially, at this point in time, there is no real hardware support for time locks, right? So you might have, again, from your podcast and otherwise, we know that I think Liam is trying to use time locks, but there is no signing device support for it. And even if there is a signing device support, it will be without registration. So you're losing out onto some security to have some security. What we're trying to get towards with Miniscript and all is trying to get to a situation where you don't have to lose security too much to gain time lock as a feature. So these things are yet to be developed.
Yeah, totally fair. I mean, the security, the whole reason why we're using multisig to begin with is the security benefits. So obviously we're not going to, throw that out the window. So yeah, I think that's important. So I guess couple tips that maybe we should leave listeners with. Just make sure when you're doing your multisig, you keep it simple, right? Like, don't do something crazy. Don't sort of stay in the well-trodden pathways. I think there are good reasons to use the typical like 2 of 3 or 3 of 5. I think for most people, unless you have a specific use case, I think for most people, 2 of 3 or 3 of 5 is probably going to be a good quorum for people. Making sure you keep those backups, as we mentioned, the backup of the output descriptor or the BSMS. I think those are important points to remember. But yeah, I guess, do you have any other kind of tips on multi-sig before we finish that?
No, I think it's just a quick TLDR on what we discussed. Like, okay, there are these three, these two good configurations available, and a lot of software wallets like Keeper offer that. So stick to that. Take backups, test it out, like we said. Test it out on multiple hardware devices, any devices, and also test it out probably on multiple coordinating software like Sparrow and Keeper and Spectre wallet. And when you do that, you will be so comfortable because you're seeing three different things telling you exactly the same balance and the same output. So it'd be like, you know what, I kind of trust this situation or this system that I've built. So if you do these few things, then multisig is not that difficult.
Yeah, so I think it's worthwhile for a lot of people. Now, certainly not for the beginners, but I think for people who are, let's say, you're a long-time Bitcoiner, and your stack is worth a reasonable amount. It's worth your while, right? Like, I think people lose perspective sometimes, right? Because they might be like someone who, maybe bought some coins a few years ago or whatever, and the prices run up, and now they've got like, over $1 million worth of coin, or let's say over 25 coins in like a single signature hardware wallet or hardware signing device or hardware signer. And, maybe it's time for you to think, hey, if you're holding, over 20 or 25 coins worth, what's like a few hardware devices and some metal seeds? That's nothing for you, right? Like, so it's important to think about the perspective.
We did, sorry, just on that point, we did some, back of the envelope calculation. But like I said, a typical multisig today costs $500, right? And let's say even if you have Bitcoins worth $5,000, which is probably, a quarter of a Bitcoin, a 0.2 Bitcoin, depending on the price, that will mean, something around 5 to 10% of the security cost. Now in Bitcoin, that it can 10x very easily. And if it does 10x, then it will become like 1% of your cost. Having a security cost of 1% to secure the whole amount is a decent security cost, right? So if you think about it in those terms and put in some hours of effort, actually, like, you have orders of magnitude better security, and the cost is not really high. It is 1% of the total amount potentially. So that's probably one way to think about it.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's the multi-sig aspect. Let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin for India. So I unfortunately couldn't make it last year because of clashes and stuff, but I'm looking forward to being there. Off the top of my head, is it October 14th and 15th, I think?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to just give us an update on Bitcoin for India?
Absolutely. So this is the community piece that some of us are involved in with other volunteers, but more than happy to put it on this platform as well, that Stephan will be in person there, and there will be many other Bitcoiners who would be there, who would be talking to plebs in India and talking multisig, talking passphrase, talking a lot of stuff. How to do probably running a node. So it will be a mixed conference like it was this time. There will be a technical track and there will be a main track. But we are very excited about it, and we are obviously going to look for more and more participation this time from speakers and from audience. So yes, this is in October 14th, 15th is the date as of now.
Fantastic. And in Bangalore, right? And so yeah. I'm also, it's been 1 year now, like Bitcoin, it will have been, you've already had the first conference, you've been growing this meetup network, let's say, of more committed Bitcoiners. And so hopefully there'll be a growth in the community by then. And who knows, maybe there'll be a lot of people joining the community between now and then. So maybe they'll all be there as well. So looking forward to that. Any other points you wanted to mention before we finish up?
No, I think by the time this probably the pod goes out, the Keeper app would be available on mainnet. Till now, it was on testnet. It is still beta, but it is available on mainnet, so it's very easy for people to test out. So do give it a run, try it out with small amounts of sats. And give us some feedback. It is an awesome product, and we hope you love it.
Fantastic. Okay, Anant, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me again. Cheers.